Hey everyone, Jarrad VK3BL Lima here, and today I'm going to go through the menus of the IC-7300. This is an extremely popular radio and there's a lot of people out there with it, and it's one of my personal favourites. I just think it was just perfect from the factory and I really love it. So I'm going to help everyone out and go through the menu and talk about some of the settings. Here we go. First of all, you press the menu button down the bottom here. This presents you with your main menu and shows you some of the features such as the scope, the audio scope, the voice keyer, the meters, the SWR tool. That one's actually not in the IC7610, so a lot of people like that and miss that. The memory, which I don't use as a HF operator. Scanning, which once again I don't use. There's the memory pad. I've never found a use for that one either. Let's have a look what it does. It lets you make memos and that sort of thing, but it's not really what I need. So I prefer to have my radio set up like this, showing the waterfall. So anyway, we'll go back. You've got record, which will let you go through your recordings. You can start the recordings using the quick menu option. The record one here mainly lets you see or playback or delete all your different recordings. But what we're interested today in is the settings. So let's have a look in the settings. Your first option on page 1 is tone control. Now when you go into tone control, you can set tone control for both RX or TX. RX, you can set the tone, and so this is basically your bass or your treble roll EQ settings for all the different modes you operate. I mainly operate SSB, so if we have a look in there, you can see there's the bass and the treble. As I mentioned, I leave them flat. I like to use an external speaker to control those things. But you've also got the option of doing an audio high pass or low pass filter. This is actually separate from the IF filter. I haven't found a need for it personally. I use a Yaesu SP2000 external speaker, which has the same thing. One interesting thing about this though is that when you set it, your maximum, or I guess minimum low pass filter is 2400 Hertz, which is significantly lower than your IF filter. So that's generally why I don't like to leave it set. Let's just say we did set it to something. If we were to go out and we wanted to restore that to the default settings, and this applies to all of the menu options, you can hold it down and hit default. Just as that implied, you might have seen it say quick menu there. Let's just try it out. You can also press quick for quick menu and do a default there. So there's two ways of going back to your standard settings. With the bass, it's just a simple slider, 1 or 2. In the icons, I find that 1, 2, just a couple is enough to make a big difference. If you've listened to my IC7610 versus IC7300 video, audio comparison shootout video, you will have noted that the bass coming out, especially on AM broadcast, is significantly lower than the IC7610. So if you want a bassier sounding radio when you're listening to shortwave stations, would be best to go into the AM menu and adjust the bass. So I'll just clear that again with the quick menu, and we'll go out of that. So as I was talking about here, if you're big on listening to shortwave stations and you'd like to have a full sound, you might want to go in here and set that to 1 and give that a shot. I'm going to leave that like that because I do like listening to our local AM stations, and although this would also affect my AM operations, if I'm using the AM mode, I don't tend to do much AM transmitting and operating, basically because it's very, very hard on your station. So I'm very much an SSB guy, but I do a lot of AM shortwave listening. So I'm just going to boost that up to 1, and I'll let you know how it goes next time. Likewise, I don't recommend using the built-in audio high pass and low pass filters for any band. With the way the IF filter works and the fact this is an SDR, I actually don't really see the point to those features. I think they're mainly part of the legacy of the Icom menu system. So we'll go out of that for now. In CW, you've got the RX high pass and low pass. There's no tone controls as expected. And FM, you also have your full RX, high pass, low pass, RX bass. Same thing applies. Adjust it to how you like it, or if you use an external speaker like I do, generally just leave it flat. Sorry. If we go back to TX, this is where the real fun is. You've got three options: SSB, AM, and FM. In SSB, I generally run my TX bass at 0 or -1, my TX treble at +2 to give a little bit more presence to my voice and help with intelligibility. I do have quite a deep voice after all. And this is where you set your default transmission bandwidths. You've got three options. We'll scroll down the page a little bit. No, we can't do that. You've got TX bandwidth wide, TX bandwidth mid, and then down the bottom you've got TX bandwidth narrow. Now I like to have my TX bandwidth wide at the stock at 100 to 2900. I'll just see if that's the default because I can't remember. It is. So I like to have it that way because that gives you 2.8 kilohertz worth of bandwidth, which isn't a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. It's definitely not ESSB, but it does give a very nice, very easily readable sound. The second option, TX, and that's great for rag chewing, I should add. The second option is the one I use most, TX bandwidth mid. So if we click on that or touch that for a second, and this is where I guess the quick menu thing doesn't help so much because every time you select an item, it does actually take you straight into the menu. So if I wanted to default wide, for instance, I'd have to hold down. That would be the only way. Anyway, so if we go to TX bandwidth, sorry, if I talk about TX bandwidth mid, and we're going to default it, the default is 300 to 2700. That gives you the standard 2.4 kilohertz bandwidth, which most of the radios in the last 20 years, most entry-level HF rigs, that's basically their default receive bandwidth. I like to open mine up a little bit, especially to help operators who have rigs that can hear a little bit higher, and so I like to increase mine to 2900. I leave the bass at 300, that filter. Sorry, I forget the name of it now, but I leave that at 300. So that's the high pass, and the low pass, yeah, I leave at 2900. That's how I prefer, and the reason I do that is so that basically, if someone has a receiver that can hear more than 2.4 kilohertz, they're not going to get a huge boomy signal, but they are going to hear a bit more presence in my voice. So that's why I like to increase it to 2900. It certainly would help with things like contests and de-expeditions to some degree. Now, TX bandwidth narrow. This is the one where, you know, if you really want to get all your power into a just intelligible form, if you really need to work that rare DX or that really distant contest station, this is the one you want to use. This is that really tinny sound that you often hear contesters using. Now I'll just check it. We'll go back out, we'll give it a default, and I've left mine default for that exact reason. It transmits 2 kilohertz worth of bandwidth, which is actually quite a decent amount in terms of a narrow transmitter. If you go into it, you'll see that no, you can't decrease it anymore. So that's about as narrow as it goes, and I like to keep it that way just for those really rare ones. So that's my settings and advice for configuring your audio on IC-7300. Now that advice applies both to the stock microphone, which sounds very, very good, and also to any external mics. Something like a higher mic, you do need to set settings elsewhere, such as the microphone gain, but they're not in this menu here. Now, you've got all the same. In AM, you've got TX bass and treble. You don't have all the filters. You've just got the one standard filter. And in FM, once again, you've got TX bass and treble. I haven't played with FM, to be honest, on this radio at all, so I can't offer advice. I would just leave them flat, maybe increase treble a little bit in line with giving your voice that little bit of extra intelligibility. And the same goes for AM. I haven't played with it much. I have been told the radio does sound quite nice out of the box on AM, so I would probably recommend leaving it alone or just putting the treble up a little bit. So that's all of the tone control. In function, let's have a look. Go back to page 1. The radio actually remembers the last page you're on, which is really useful if you go and change settings. And you find you don't like the setting, because you can go straight back into the menu and you'll be there. The first one is the beep level. That's the level of the beep the radio makes when you press buttons and that sort of thing. I've never felt the need to change it off 50%. If we touch it, it does just go back up and down. It actually goes in smaller increments than 1%. You have to press it. Let's count. 1, 2, 3. You have to press it 3 times to make a difference, which is a little interesting. I wouldn't have thought you needed such fine beep control, but there you go. There's a beep level limit. I'd suggest leaving that on. Basically, the idea behind that is if you've got your receiver up really loud and you're wearing headphones, it's not going to give you a really big beep. Beep confirmation, that's for when you change a menu option or something. I leave that on. I've never felt the need to change any of the beeps, including the band edge beep. I think it's quite useful for the radio to tell you when you go past your band edge and you're at risk of, well, it won't let you transmit, but it lets you know you're not on an amateur band anymore. So we'll go to page 2. Now this first option here is RF SQL control. What that does is change what this inside knob here does. You can have, there's a few different options, so we'll have a look. I like the standard one, which is RF plus SQL, but I'll explain them all. I'm not actually sure what auto does, to be honest, so I'd have to check that. So I suspect it's something to do with when you go into FM and that sort of thing. It might change between a squelch and an RF gain. As I said, I've never felt the need to change it. But the main option that someone might be interested in is squelch. Now, when it's in squelch mode, all it does is operate as a squelch control for the whole, well, it's almost 360 degrees, let's just say 300 degrees of its operation. That could be useful if you just want to sit on one frequency and you've got high, to talk on your local net and you've got high noise, but I've never needed it. I like the default RF plus squelch. What that does is it basically centers the knob and gives it 2 functions when it's at 12 o'clock. If you turn it to the left or counterclockwise, it acts as a squelch. As an RF gain reducer. So it'll reduce your RF gain, which is sort of like a variable attenuator. If you turn it past 12 o'clock, your RF gain will be normal or full, but it will start acting as a squelch. And I find that a really, really useful feature. And you can actually see it acting as a squelch. If you look closely at my TX-RX light, as I move it more clockwise or to the right, all of a sudden it'll stop receiving. And if we turn the volume up, you'll note there's nothing there. Now if we roll it back, you can hear the band hiss. No one's transmitting there anymore. So I actually recommend leaving that one alone. MF band attenuation. I don't think that's on by default, but let's find out. It is. I recommend leaving this on. Certainly where I live, with a decent sized antenna, if you don't have MF band attenuation on, the receiver can be easily overloaded. Now you can easily counter that by winding your RF gain back, or you could switch on your attenuator over here with the power amp attenuator button. But why go to the hassle when you can just leave this on? TX delay. This one was covered by Rob Sherwood recently with the IC-7600, and he actually recommended a few different, especially for the IC-7600, but given this radio doesn't switch quite as quickly as the 7610, I'd actually recommend turning this on, and I imagine that's what Rob Sherwood would do as well. If you've got a vacuum relay amplifier or a pin diode amplifier, set it to 15 milliseconds. If you've got a mini relay or quite a modern amplifier, like at my Tokyo High Power, somewhere between 20 or 25. Now, given how short 20 or 25 milliseconds is, I would just say 25 for me. Now, if you have a open frame relay amplifier, like an old Heathkit or a Meritron, set it to 30. I'm going to set mine to 25 now, and we'll do that. I haven't operated 50 meters, nor do I have an amplifier, so I've got no reason for 50 meters, so I've got no reason to change that setting. Next one here is timeout timer for sieve. If we go into that, you can see the different options here. This is mainly if you've got external accessories connected to your radio. So SIV, when a lot of people think of SIV, they think of USB or serial to the computer. But Icom's SIV infrastructure actually allows you to daisy chain a whole bunch of devices together and control them. It's sort of like a shared serial bus. That's what this setting's for. Unless you've got a bunch of those accessories, you just leave it off. If you do have the accessories, you probably should consult their manuals for whether they need a timeout timer or whatnot. It's probably just there to stop the radio waiting on a command back from one of the accessories. Let's go to page 3. Number 1 is split. Let's press on split. So you've got quick split, you've got some split offsets that you can define for FM, and split lock. Quick split is quite useful. What that does, you can turn it on and off. What that does is if you hold down the split button, it'll automatically, set the split of the radio. So especially if you've got FM ones defined, and as you can see, this is optimized for CW with being 0.1 up. When you press the split button, it'll automatically do that split for you. So I've left it alone. I haven't felt the need to change that. I'll give you a demonstration. Let's have a look. So if we press split now, you can see that it's gone up 0.1. If you press split and hold, it'll copy the exact frequency. So that's basically what that does. We'll go back into it. Once again, as I said, I haven't felt the need to change any of the split settings. The main thing to know is if you want to set your VFO-B to the VFO-A frequency, just hold down the split button and it will do that automatically for you. And then you can go and use A and B to set it to exactly what you want. So that's that. Let's have a look in Tuner. Tuner lets you control how the radio's tuner feature works, both the internal and the external one. With the tuner switch, what auto and manual does is basically, let's have a look. Manual tuner, sorry. That basically decides whether when you go between bands, whether the tuner stays active or not. I believe. I could be wrong on that. I had to stop and think, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that lets you know whether the tuner stays on between bands. Why don't we find out? So on auto, I'll press the tuner button, and then we'll change the band. You might have heard the tuner click and the tuner's off. Go back to 7, and the tuner's on again. Go back to 14, tuner's off. Now if we go back into that menu item, let's have a look. We'll tune it, put it back on manual. We'll go here, and go back to 7. As you can see, the tuner didn't come back on, so that's what that does. I actually like it on, well, thinking about it, I probably like it off because I use an external tuner. So the default is auto, and that's to remember your tuner preference per band. And if you don't use internal tuner, manual's good because then the tuner won't accidentally come on, sort of thing. Push to talk start, once again, if you're using the tuner in the radio, you probably want to have that on. That's quite useful. If the radio decides that it can optimize your transmissions by adjusting the tuner, it will do that the minute you key up. So as I don't use an external tuner, I don't want that turned on. These settings apply to both the internal tuner, the 3-to-1 built into the radio, and the AH4 control. Now, if we go back to, if we look at the last option on this page, which is preset memory clear, what that does, and I don't think it'll do it, yeah, so it'll give you a warning. What that does is basically clear all the memories the radio has of your antenna. That'll mean it'll take a little bit longer to tune each time. So we'll go out of that one now. You've got your RIDI mark frequency and your RIDI width. These are both out of the box set up for RIDI operations, so I don't advise tweaking them. Let's have a look at page 4. Page 4, RIDI key polarity. Once again, that's on normal. I've never needed to change that. I don't recommend you do. Speech, This adjusts what basically the speech knob does. So the speech knob reads out where you are. Let's see if it does something here. It won't there. Let's go back to here. Oh, sorry, I had the volume down.
5 megahertz.
There we go.
LSB.
So as you can see, if you press speech, it'll read out the frequency. I've had to turn the RF gain right down because you do have to have the volume knob up.
S07.135 megahertz. LSB.
All right, so let's go back into the menu, and you can hear the beep now too because I've got the volume up. See how it went straight back to page 4? We'll go into speech. You can change the language between English and Japanese. I believe the latest firmware update actually includes a new language. You can change the speed. You can change the level. You can change, let's have a look at mode speech, whether it tells you your mode. And, oh, sorry, there's the speech level. I'm not actually sure what S speech level means, but we'll have to look that one up one day. But there's your speech level. I actually find it's a bit low, so if I was going to use the feature, I'd probably recommend turning it up to, say, 75%. Let's have a listen to this.
S07.135 megahertz. LSB.
It's a little disappointing it didn't read out the menu options I was on, but it's still useful for radio operation. I would say that what S level speech does is basically if you've got your volume turned right up, it makes sure it squelches your, basically it doesn't blast your ears out. So we'll go out of this option and we'll turn this down again. The speech lock switch lets you decide what this, when pressing the button, what the default operation is. In my case, I'd probably rather have it as lock. So I'm going to change it to lock because then I can lock my radio. Can't do it while I'm in the menu. The lock function lets you decide what locking it does. I've got young kids who love to turn the big knob. So for me, having it lock the main dial is my preferred option. I believe that's also the default. Let's have a look. Yep, that's the default. You can, however, have it lock the entire panel, which once again may be good for young kids, but it won't stop them rotating. It won't stop them rotating the volume knob or the squelch knob. So you'll still have to make sure the young kids or the pest or the cat hasn't knocked those sort of knobs. We'll leave it like that. On page 5, you've got your memo pad quantity. The standard's 5. As we saw on the screen before, there wasn't a whole lot to see there anyway, so I wouldn't recommend increasing it. The main dial tuning speed, auto tuning speed. On these radios, they have a variable tuning speed, much like automobiles these days have variable steering. When if you move the steering wheel a little bit, it doesn't do much. If you move it a lot, it does a lot. That's what this does. So you can see it's quite slow, but if I twist it really fast, it starts jumping all over the place. Turn that tuner off again. So I've left it as high. I think that's a good speed, but but you can change that if you want to, or you can turn it off completely if you want it to be completely linear. I love high. I recommend keeping it that way. Mic up and down speed. That's if you're to use the mic up and down buttons. Let's have a look how they function. So they're going 0.05 kilohertz. Oh, well, let me get this right. I always get this confused. But they're going, what am I on? 7100 kilohertz. So they're in the hertz. So this is going up and down 50 hertz at a time. So you can change that if you want. And if we go to slow, no, it still goes up and down the same. Well, I'm a bit confused as to what that setting actually does, to be honest. So we'll leave it at fast. It probably makes a difference if you were to hold the buttons down, actually. If you were to hold it down like that, it'll make a difference then, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, so it is, when you hold the button down, it's slightly slower now. Having just done that experiment, I recommend leaving that as fast. Quick RIT or transmit shift clear is off. You can turn that on. What does that do? We've got a clear button right here. Let's find out. So if I press RIT and then I adjust it, now I can turn it on and off and it will remember my RIT setting. What happens if I hold it down? It won't clear. I can then just press the clear button. Sorry, I'll do that again. I can press the clear button and it won't clear it. You actually have to hold it down just for a brief second, about a second. Now, if we go in and we turn the quick clear on, let's have a look. Turn the RIT on, and if I hold this down, it clears it. But it also then goes and adjusts your main VFO to include where your RIT setting was. I don't like that one little bit, and so I have that off. I remember now playing with that, and I don't like it at all. The default's off, and I'm keeping it that way. We're on page 6 now of function, and you've got the notch switch, what it does on SSB and AM. Auto or manual notch. And you can basically say, what does pressing it do? Does it always do auto, or does it always do manual, or can it do auto or manual? So I'll give you a demonstration. And we'll put a little bit of signal in there. Turn the volume down a little bit. But when you press the notch, if you press it once, it goes to auto notch. Press it twice, it goes to narrow notch. Press it a third time, it goes off. If you hold it down, it will go to manual and bring up your notch position and your width. If you were to go into function and change that to just be auto, all it does is go between auto and manual notch. Holding it down does nothing. So in my mind, there's not a huge amount of benefit to changing these settings. I'm a big fan of the auto of the notch button. You may have heard that in my earlier videos, and I think Icom got it perfect with these settings. SSB CW synchronous tuning. I'm not exactly sure what that does, to be honest, but I turned it on the IC-7600 and I liked it, so I'm going to turn it on here. I didn't even know it was there. I believe it helps your receiver tune into the receive station. You've got your CW setting, which is your normal side, the normal sideband you're listening to, and that's set to LSB. That's the default. You can change it to upper sideband, but you might get that might make things a little bit hard when you're trying to work everyone else on LSB. It's up to you. I'm sure you can work around it, but I leave it as normal. I'm not a big CW op, if I'm being honest. I can copy my call at 30 words a minute. I was pretty impressed with that. I learned that in a night. So page 7, screen capture when you press the power switch. I love this feature. By default, it's actually off. When it's on, what you can do is take a picture of what's on the screen and save it to the SD card. Just like that. I recommend turning that on. It lets you document things, document settings in case you forget later. You can change the file type. PNG is the one you want to go for. BMP or bitmap takes up a lot of space. PNG is an open source file standard, royalty free, and it compresses the file a bit using less SD card memory. So I completely recommend using PNG. I'm pretty sure that's the default too. Yes, it is. Keyboard type, full keyboard or 10 key. Well, I've never plugged a keyboard into this radio, and it's not particularly easy. Although I do think that's referring to the on-screen keyboard. I've always left it as full keyboard. To be honest, there's not many times that I've had to use a keyboard on this radio. So I've entered my call sign maybe, and that's about it. Calibration marker, you can turn that on or off. Let's have a look what that... Okay, so you can hear that puts a slight tone there. And that's to help you calibrate your radio. So you want that off by default, which it is, unless you're calibrating your radio. On page 8, we've got your reference adjust, and that's the calibration. That's where you do the calibration. That's done in the factory for each individual radio. So don't mess with it. If you are going to mess with it, take a screenshot first. The next one is connectors. Let's have a look in connectors. Go back to page 1. You've got your accessory and USB output select, whether you want it to be audio frequency or IF. For digital mode operation and in almost every use case, you want it to be audio frequency. You've got your output level. I leave that as default. I think that's fine, and I just adjust levels on my computer. You've got the option to turn squelch on. Now, you never really want a signal squelched when you're feeding your digital mode software, so once again I've left that at default, which is always open. This one here, you've got whether or not when you press speech or press a button on the radio, whether it will beep and send that through your USB. Now, unless you say using a set of USB speakers and stuff like that, you're going to want that off as well. Let's go to the next menu. That will interfere with your digital mode software. The only time you want that on is, as I said, if you're using a set of computer stereo speakers to listen to your radio through your computer, mind you. You've got the IF output level. As I said, I don't use that and don't know of anyone who does, so just leave that alone. The mod level, this is when you're transmitting a digital mode, how strong the radio takes that. Basically, does it, does the preamp it's basically the preamp adjust in the radio for the incoming USB signal. I leave all of these default and just adjust it in software. It's just easier that way. It's one less thing to go wrong. Data mode off. This sets what the radio is expecting as an input when the data mode is off. Probably the best option is to just the default is mic and accessory. That's the accessory port. If you're not using the accessory port, it's probably good to set it just to mic, just for best practice. In theory, you'll get slightly better performance because that circuit isn't connected to your modulator, but the reality is it doesn't make any noticeable difference. You've got your data mode when your data mode's turned on, where you want your audio to come from. If you're using the JT modes and that sort of thing, and you're using if you're using digital software and you're using the built-in USB cable, the USB port on the radio, you want it on USB. If for some reason you're running a signal link or something, you'll want it to be the accessory. External keypad. There's a wonderful video of a homebrew external keypad on the YouTube channel Ham Homestead. So if you want to build an external keypad, I'd advise checking out their channel. They show you how to do it, and you actually have to input it through the mic connector. So it's a bit of a pain. Jack from Ham Homestead is completely the expert on these things. So I would shoot him an email if you're interested in that particular feature. Basically, what it lets you do is just have 8 buttons so that you can send your pre-programmed voice messages, your pre-programmed CW messages, or your pre-programmed RIDI messages. You've got the Civ menu. This is very extensive, and this really depends on your operation. There's 2 pages. It goes from Civ baud rate. I leave that on auto. It generally works well on auto, and it's actually referring to the external connector. So you don't need to adjust it at any time, especially if you're just using computer connection. You've got the Civ address. Now I've had to change mine to 5C because I drive an external amplifier, and it expects my radio to be sitting on 5C. Now, with 5C, with that, these, as I said, these are all referring to the Civ port on the back. They're not referring to the way the computer is talking to the radio. So you can have the radio on 5C here, but then the computer in its Civ software will actually get a completely different address. So yeah, that's fine to set as 5C. Now the way to make the computer and your external amplifier talk all nicely is to have Civ transceive set to on, which is the default setting, I believe. Let's have a look. It is. You've got Civ USB to remote transceive address. I've left that alone. I've never needed to change that. You've got Civ output for antenna. I've never felt the need to change that either. So if you've got some accessories that want to know which antenna you're on and that sort of thing, you might need to turn that on. For Civ USB port, I have it as unlinked from remote, and for Civ USB baud rate, I have 115200, and that lets you use the spectrum scope on the RSBA1 software. Sieve echo back, you want to have that on, otherwise some digital mode software gets a bit confused and won't work properly. So they're my settings for the Sieve menu. USB serial function, you want that set to Sieve. Sometimes people use it for RIDI decode, but most people, and when it's set to RIDI decode, basically it swings your virtual serial port between two states and lets you do RIDI decoding and RIDI encoding in the radio rather than as an audio frequency. I don't see the need to do that. I just leave it as Sieve. Sieve lets you use all the digital mode software, not just some RTDY stuff. So on page 4 of connectors, we've got USB send. I left that off because once again that refers to the RIDI option. You've got this function. You've got USB keying for CW, I've left that off, and USB keying for RIDI, I've left that off as well. As I said, I drive my radio with audio frequency for modulation, so you don't need to set any of those. The next menu is display. In display, you've got the screensaver. I'd actually recommend setting the screensaver to 15 minutes. If you do find you need a longer screensaver, feel free to change it. Let's default it. The default's 60 minutes. I recommend 15 minutes. If it does annoy you by going off too quickly, just go and change it back. It can never hurt to turn an LCD display off. Opening message. That's whether or not basically it shows you an opening message with your call sign. I'll put my call sign in here. Here's that keyboard I was telling you about. This is the full keyboard rather than the 10 key one. I found this keyboard quite nice to use and easy to enter my calls, so I've already done that, and I recommend, as I said before, leaving it as full keyboard. Power check on. That basically does the radio do a check when you first turn it on. I believe that's the default setting. Let's have a look. It is, and I don't see a need to turn that off. I want my radio checked when I power it on. The last one is display language. At the moment you've got English and Japanese. I believe some firmware updates have more, but I speak English and I certainly don't speak Japanese, so that's what I'm going to stick with. If we go down one more, you've got your time setting. You can set your date and time. That I believe is wrong at the moment. It is. It's out by about an hour, so we'll put that down. Oh, sorry. No. We'll go back. Ooh, this is a tricky one. UTC offset. I'll leave that alone actually. Basically, we've got daylight savings time in Australia now, so we're back an hour. Now notice there, when I went down and went return, it didn't set it. So you actually have to press the set button to get that to happen. So we've done that. You can actually set the radio, I believe, so that you have the radio on UTC, and then you can just change your UTC offset, but I haven't seen any advantage to doing that on this radio. There is on the IC-7610. SD card, you can load your settings that you've previously saved, save your settings, view some info. You can view the screen captures on the radio, you don't need to use a computer. You can do firmware updates, format, or unmount. Whenever you use an SD card for the first time with a device that's not a computer, I recommend putting the SD card in and then formatting it on that device. That way you know it's set up perfectly for the device, and I've never had a computer not recognize it. When you remove an SD card from the radio, you should go into this menu, which is Menu, Set, SD card, page 2, Unmount, and unmount it first. That way you'll know that the data is saved to your SD card. In practice, I haven't had any problems just pulling it out, but that's the best way of doing it. I do recommend you do that, or turn the radio off. If you turn the radio off, that does the same thing as unmounting. So while we're here, I'm going to save my settings. There's some settings I'd saved previously. I'll go New File. I can't be bothered with a name for it, so I'll just hit Enter. Do I want to save it? Yes, I do. Completed, done. Now, if I had to return the radio or factory default it for some reason, I can just go and load my settings straight back in, and it's very quick. Which is the latest one? Let's have a look. 2018, press that, and you can load all the settings, or you can select just the settings you want. I'm not actually going to load it, but it's all there, and it loads very, very quickly, so that's great. SD card info, that shows you the free space. As you can see, I've got over 7.2 gig free. So that's going to let me record 132 hours of voice. That's pretty cool. And that's only an 8 gig card. Screen capture view. There you go. We're viewing a screen capture. Now, when you're viewing a screen capture, the power light flashes to let you know that what's on the screen isn't actually what you're doing. So we'll go out of that. Now, to go out of it, I believe you just have to touch the screen anywhere. That's what I thought. We'll go down one more. Firmware update. Very easy to do on an Icom. Won't give you a demonstration now. We'll go out of that. And in others, there's just a few things like information, what version your radio is on, touchscreen calibration. I hate it when I press this. You press the little dots. Now, this is something I've never found the need to do, and the only time I've ever done it is when I've been recording one of these videos. And every time I press it, I wish it gave me a warning. I really did. Reset. We'll press it because I'm pretty sure this will give me a warning. You can do partial reset or full reset. So there is, just pressing the button is not going to wipe your radio. You've got emergency mode, and this is an interesting one. It doesn't ring a bell or get an ambulance to come around to your car. What it does is let you expand your tuner range. If you press that, it says expands max matching ratio for emergencies. Output power is limited to max 50 watts. Danger, never get close to 10 during 2x. So the idea basically is that if for some reason you're stuck out in the bush just with your radio and all you've got is some random wire antenna, you can halve your power output but increase the tuning range of your radio significantly. So that's a useful feature even for general day-to-day use, although because I use an outboard tuner and have an amplifier anyway, I don't use that. So that's basically all there is to the settings menu on the IC-7300. I'll go through quickly some of the others. You've got the function ones. This is where you turn your power amps on, your IP+, all of that. Power amp should never be turned on below 20 meters. I often run attenuator on 40 meters or 80 meters. 80 meters definitely. AGC, I usually leave it mid. That's a great settings. Notch you can turn on there as well. I guess it's sort of whether you press the button or whether you use this menu is up to you, but I like the button. You can turn your noise blanker on. Once again, there's a button for it. Noise reduction, there's a button for it. Vox, I believe, no, there's also a Vox button here as well. And monitor. I think in the function menu, the only thing that you really need to go here for is to change your transmission bandwidth, although I think you can do that somewhere else as well, and turn monitor, which is hearing your voice through the phones on and off. So even though there's a lot of options, there's actually lots of buttons for these things too. It's quite good that way. So when it comes to transmit bandwidth, let's have a look. What was I going to do? Menu, no. I want to change, you press in the multi-select and let's have a look. Exit function. Nope, that is the only place you can change the transmit bandwidth. So that's mainly why you'll be pressing the function button, to change the transmit bandwidth. It also does show you what's turned on and off, because if you press notch, for instance, it quickly appears on the screen, but it doesn't show you anywhere. If you press function, at least you can tell it's on, and then you can turn it off. So that is a good menu. It does sort of show the status of your radio. The only other thing that you really need to know is you press the multi button. That's where you adjust your RF power, your mic gain, your compression, and your monitor, which is the, through the headphones, your own voice levels. At the moment, I've got mine set to 50 watts, and mine puts out about exactly what the percentage says. Mic gain's up really high because I run a dynamic microphone, a Heil PR781 with this radio, and compressors on 1. And they're the optimal settings for my ALC, for my voice anyway, and how I like to talk to the microphone. So anyway, this winds up my menu overview video of, I'll show you one last thing. If you press the quick button, this is where you can start a recording. Now I'm recording what I'm hearing on air. So if we were to go to here, that's all being recorded to the SD card now, and you can tell by the flashing light. To stop it, you just press quick and stop. And that's all there is to the basic operation of the IC-7300. I hope you've enjoyed the menu overview, and I hope you enjoy in my channel. Please comment on anything I've missed or any mistakes that I've made. I always like to talk to everyone, and I like to think I'm friendly. So if I've got something wrong, I'll apologise and thank the person who's pointed it out. This is Jarrad VK3BL saying 73. I hope you've enjoyed the video, probably for the third time, and as you can tell, I'm a 40-metre waffler, and enjoy your radio. This is a lovely little radio, and I don't think anyone's ever really had anything bad to say about it. So there you go. 73 is from Jarrad VK3BL, and rate my radio. Catch you on the next video. Bye.